Hello, everybody. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I am, of course, Chris Weave. This also with me is Patrick Doyle, as usual. I'll go ahead and say it now. Nothing that we say should be interpreted as the opinion of any employer, past, present, or future. Let's get that out of the way. To the best of my knowledge, my employer has no policy on any of the things that we talk about on this show. Although I do know for a fact that Foreign Policy, the blog associated with Foreign Policy, has published stuff on Starship Combat because they actually interviewed me for it. So, Pat, how have you been?
Good. How's your week been?
Busy. I spent about busy enough that I spent about an hour or two doing work stuff today, and really wanted to spend about another 2 hours doing work stuff today. Because if I don't do it today, I'm going to have to do it tomorrow, and I'm not pleased about that. But it is what it is.
Yeah, employment is good.
Employment is good. It's just we've gotten really busy lately because things are heating up. There's all sorts of stuff spitting up. People are having lots of good ideas. I mean, people have basically been sitting in their apartment or their houses for the last year doing nothing but thinking up ways to increase my workload. And now all those good ideas are bursting forth like Athena from the brow of Zeus. So, yeah, it's keeping me busy. But what about you? You're back in the simulator full time, right?
Yep. Back full time. So I've got that going for me, which is nice.
I assume, like, before when you were doing simulator stuff, you still did like one flight a month, right?
Yeah, and we still will, in theory, most of the time. Yeah.
Because every now and then you have to go check a box.
No, they give us a day or two of flying out of the month because, we should still. The simulator is a very sterile environment, though, right?
Yeah.
We're the only airplane on the airport for the most part. We're the only airplane talking to ATC in the simulator. The simulator instructor can only be, they've got to run the simulator. They've got to pretend to be ATC. They've got to pretend to be anybody you're talking to on the radio. So given those limitations, it's a very sterile environment. The real world's a lot messier. So it's good to get out in the real world every now and then and deal with the messiness and, all that kind of stuff. You can run things more by the book in the simulator. Not to say you can't in the real world, but you have a greater number of distractions is a better way to put it.
Yeah, and there's stuff that'll come up in the real world that you won't think of in the simulator unless you've previously experienced it in the real world. Right.
Well, we don't simulate a drunk passenger in the simulator, right? or any of the other things that could, random things. Hey, the toilet's not flushing. Hey,
Well, next time I come to Minneapolis, if you want to simulate a drunk passenger, I'm up for it. I'll put on my cosplay clothes and I'll simulate for you. Yeah, exactly. I guess also, presumably, as a pilot, you like flying airplanes, so
most of the time. Yeah, exactly. So when there's not lots of weird, strange things happening. Well, what I would say is on a nice, pretty sunny day like today, it's just fun. The worse the weather is and the more maintenance issues you have, the more it begins to simulate work.
Yeah. So I understand how that goes.
But the bad experiences usually generate good stories. So you got that going for you. You can at least occasionally file those away and have something to tell.
That's good. So I can't remember if I've asked you. You haven't gotten a COVID shot yet, have you?
No, not yet.
So I told you earlier today, but I'll tell everybody else now. So I had been originally when my employer had come to me and said, we're gearing up to give people COVID shots on base. Which category do you think you're in based upon, medical history and whether you have a job that requires you to be around people? Do you have to go into work, stuff like that? And I said, oh no, I'm working at home. I've got some risk factors for it. Those who followed my Facebook page long enough know that I got to go to the ER 4 times in 1 week in 2018. And I had a cardiac ablation. And so, I'm still a little overweight despite having surgery to take care of that and things like that. I've got asthma. So, I got a few risk factors. But, I'm working at home. I somebody else who has to go out and work with people, let them have priority. And so I said, I'm good being at the back of the bus on this one. And then they came and they said, yeah, we got this new project and we want you to get on airplanes and fly places and go hang out with lots of people and do it for multiple weeks and multiple times. And it's like, shit. So I'm going to have to. So I was girding my loins for going out and finding a COVID vaccine. I was thinking about, okay, people had told me about various strategies to go and basically harass pharmacies until they finally give in and say yes, and keep it, talk to get on as many different lists as possible. And I'm thinking I'm going to have to track all this information, otherwise I'll end up with somebody saying, yeah, this is like the 3rd time you've called me, the answer is still no, sort of stuff. So I'm just getting ready to start working on that when I get this text message saying, hey, this is your pharmacy. Do you want a COVID shot? Sure.
Cool. Yeah, not bad. Not bad.
So the total amount of work I did was to click on a link. I didn't even have to type in the link. I just clicked on it. I didn't even have to use Google.
Wait a minute. You clicked on a link that got emailed to you?
A text message from my pharmacy, which texts me all the time about picking up prescriptions. So
okay.
I knew it was a good link. I knew it was really them.
All right.
And I've got the piece of paper with the time scheduled to prove it. So next Thursday, I get to go get a shot. So,
cool.
Which will be good because they want to send me to Hawaii in June. So that timing will work out.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like not a bad place to go. What is it? June?
What?
You said June?
June.
Cool. Okay.
So I've spent about 3 months in Hawaii total over the course of the last, starting in about 2003-ish, 2002. At one point when I worked at CNA, they were sending me to Hawaii twice a year.
Oh, okay.
So the last trip to Hawaii I thought was better than a lot of the previous ones have been. I enjoyed it a lot more, but I never really got Hawaii until, this last trip was, I will admit this last trip was pretty good, but Hawaii just, I'd rather just not have to get on an airplane for 14 hours to get there, but it is what it is. So it's sort of funny because everybody goes, oh, you get to go to Hawaii. And it's like, they're making me go to Hawaii.
Some people would enjoy being made to go to Hawaii.
And I get that. And like I said, the last time I was there with a pretty good group of people, and I had for some reason, I don't know what it was. I just seemed to enjoy it more. It was my first time getting on an airplane, flying on an airplane in 13 years. And I went to Hawaii and it wasn't, it was better. The entire process was better than I expected. Even the staying up all night part of it was way better than I expected it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I can't sleep worth shit on airplanes. I just can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't. I can't imagine. Yeah. Sleeping on airplanes is, you kind of doze at best.
I really hope that you don't even doze.
Well, I'm talking about back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I did the last time I went to Hawaii. There's a science fiction author. So let's talk about some science fiction. There's a science fiction author named Linda Nagata, who's written some very interesting stuff. She wrote a trilogy called The Red, which I strongly recommend. She wrote another single book called The Last Good Man, which is also very good. They're both near-term science fiction. She's written some far future stuff. Her near-term stuff I really, really like, and it was directly applicable to some of the things I was doing in my day job at the time. And she came and talked at a well-known intelligence agency located in McLean, Virginia. And because I knew the people who organized the talk, I got invited to go to CIA and see her give this talk about near future and private military contractors and role of AI in this, and just sort of they bring futurists in, and she's like the person who introduced her said that he at one point he was planning on doing a paper on one of the things that she talks about, and he had decided that he didn't need to write the paper. If anybody asked, he just said, "Read Linda Nagata's The Last Good Man. That'll tell you everything that I was going to tell you." So I sat on my hands and did not ask any science fiction related questions until somebody else did. Somebody else broke the ice, at which point I said, all right, somebody else has asked a science fiction question. I can go red and free now. And so I asked her, like, what's the science fiction scene like in Hawaii? You know, like, is there a science fiction scene in Hawaii? Because I know of three authors who live in Hawaii, three science fiction authors who live in Hawaii, and a fourth who used to live there and who hasn't written a science fiction novel in like 30 years, to the best of my knowledge. And she said, oh, it's dead. There's like one anime con and that's it. And that doesn't surprise me. Hawaii is not the place you go for anything that looks like culture or learning or things like that. This is a place, when I used to go there in the early 2000s, the libraries close. The libraries are open from like 9:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell you about?
Yeah, just banker's hours.
Yeah, the libraries are open banker's hours. So that'll tell you sort of like, you know, this isn't like going to Oxford. So when I found myself in Hawaii with some extra days towards the end, and had to do with shipping equipment back. There's restrictions on when you're shipping government stuff back to the mainland, classified gear, and like you can't ship it on a Friday. You have to ship it on like a Thursday or earlier. So we finished on Friday, so we couldn't ship it out until Monday. And so we had to go and pick up the gear from where it was being stored and take it over to the Air Force squadron that's going to ship it for us and do all that stuff, etc. So we finished on Friday, but we weren't flying out until Tuesday afternoon. And so it's like I've got an entire weekend, just nothing to do. And so I sent an email to Linda and said, hey, remember me? We had lunch at this. You know, I was the guy who asked you this question, blah, blah, blah. We had lunch, etc. I'd like to, you know, I'm in Honolulu and I got a weekend to kill. If you're up for it, I'll fly to Maui with as much of a science fiction fandom as I can carry in my backpack. And, you know, we'll talk science fiction and stuff. She and her husband picked me up. They took me all over Maui.
Oh, she lives on Maui? Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and her husband had been the like number 3 guy at the big national park in Hawaii where the volcano is,
mm-hmm.
and you know there's an observatory up there and stuff like that, and so we drove up to the top, you know, and it was like 80 degrees down below, and by the time we get to the top of the volcano, it's like in the 50s, and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt. It's like, are you cold? It's like, yeah, a little bit, but I'm from Iowa. This is nothing.
Yeah.
So, had a great day. You know, they took me all over the island. It was fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's beautiful there.
Yeah, and you know, it occurs to me Maui would be a good place to build a spaceport. I think. And the reason why
I'm not sure they'd want their island wrecked by the sound of rockets.
Well, there is that. But you know, it's got the big flat plain that used to be sugarcane plantations, but they all closed. So you've got this huge amount of land there in the middle. The winds might not be in the right place for exceptionally long runways to like land space shuttle type things back on board, but you know they're closer to the equator. So that helps a lot. They've got water in all directions. If you want to do a water launch, you can drag stuff out to sea and do a water launch. If you want to do something like Sea Dragon or you know, drone ships or something like that, you know, it's in a good location. You don't have to worry about dropping a booster on somebody by accident, because you've got large amounts of water in all directions, especially to the east. I mean, that's one of the reasons Vandenberg made sense if you want to go to a polar orbit, but it doesn't really make sense if you want to go to anything less than a polar orbit, because you basically overfly the US. Now, the Chinese don't worry about this, which is why if you go on the internet, you can find all these pictures of burning boosters that have dropped on schools in China and shit like that. They're regularly dropping rockets on their own people. And the official government response is, what part of "we don't care" do you not understand?
Sounds about right.
But I think Maui would be a good place to put a spaceport. And the little island next to Maui, can't remember its name, is like, it looks like it might be almost as good, and it's already like 92% owned by one person. That person is Larry Ellison of Oracle fame.
Oh, okay. All right.
He bought up 92% of the island.
Wow. Yeah. It'd be nice to have that much money, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And he's not even a particularly rich billionaire anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's like 10 billion. I mean, it's
I can imagine at some points you just don't care anymore.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to do with your money. If you want to start a rocket company and go to Mars, you probably still care about
Sure.
whether it's 10 or 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely.
But oh well. Let's see. I'm looking. Yep, I've seen there's a lot of interesting stuff in the comments. Oh, by the way, I haven't forgotten that I usually go back and respond to comments and stuff like that. I haven't done that the last couple of weeks just because I've been so damn busy. But I always try to capture all the comments at the end of the show and save them off in a file so I can go back and do that later. So if you go back to any of the previous shows from like 34 or 33 before, then there's comments attached.
Mm-hmm.
So, but unless it's a show where Pat was doing a presentation and I was able to do a whole bunch of comments, as I was able to answer comments in real time. So,
right.
So, speaking of that, Pat's not doing a presentation, but we do have a topic to talk about tonight.
Yeah. So tonight we thought we would revisit one of the other Deep Space Nine episodes tonight. The episode "The Valiant." Kind of a fun show. Just to recap, basically, it's the episode where Jake and Nog get rescued. They're being chased by a Jem'Hadar fighter. They get rescued. They're in a runabout, and they get rescued by the USS Valiant, which is a Defiant type ship, same class as the Defiant, but it happens to be crewed by a bunch of Starfleet cadets. And so it's the episode where, they're stuck behind enemy lines. They're with the cadets, and the cadets, of course, Red Squad, who've been told they're great, wonderful, super duper smart and all this kind of stuff. And they unfortunately believed a little too much of their own hype. And so we get to see them fail in their attempt to hunt down and wipe out and take out a Dominion battleship. So yeah, we thought we would talk about that today, just because it has some interesting topics that you can relate to some real world stuff, and also just kind of a fun episode. So.
Whenever they were doing the Red Squadron stuff, I was reminded of the comment that I always make about, I lived in Charlottesville for a long time, and the comment that I always made about the University of Virginia. I always said the University of Virginia is a really good school. In fact, you know how good a school the University of Virginia is, Pat?
No, I don't.
It's so good that it's almost as good as they think it is.
That would probably be applicable to the Red Squad kids, or the Red Squad cadets. Cadets or midshipmen. They've used both of those terms. So I prefer midshipmen, of course, but that's my own bias. So Anyways, so in the episode, so Jake and Nog are out flying around in a runabout, and the area where they're in gets attacked by Jem'Hadar, and one of the Jem'Hadar ships breaks off and chases Nog and Jake, and they end up sort of getting chased deeper and deeper into Dominion space. Now, I can only assume that the Jem'Hadar fighter that broke off to chase them was the one in the battle group that was already damaged, and maybe had some lingering damage from a previous battle or something, because it took it a long time to catch up to them, and it took quite a few hits before it, because we've seen runabouts get killed pretty quickly by Jem'Hadar fighters. So to explain the plot armor that seemed to have protected both of them, I would assume that either the crew of that particular Jem'Hadar fighter was the wounded one in the squadron, and they said, "Yeah, you go after the lightly armed Federation shuttle." And so, as they're getting chased deeper and deeper into Dominion territory, they get sort of rescued. Just as they're about to get taken out, they think the Defiant has come to rescue them, but it turns out not the Defiant. It's called the Valiant. They get beamed aboard, and by the time they make it to the bridge, the Valiant is still fighting the Jem'Hadar fighter, which tells me I'm just gonna read stuff into things.
Go for it.
I'll go weapons free on reading into it. When we see the Defiant fighting a Jem'Hadar fighter, they kill it within seconds usually. But the cadets apparently took a long time to kill the fighter, the Jem'Hadar fighter that I'm saying was probably wounded to begin with. That's not canon or anything like that. Again, my interpretation. But so it's the cadets are fighting it. It's they're maneuvering, they're giving orders back and forth, and all this kind of stuff. And so you get to see that part of it and everything. But Defiant, with the experienced crew that Defiant is, they kill Jem'Hadar fighters in seconds.
There does seem to be some Dunning-Kruger effect taking place here, right?
You'll have to explain that.
Okay, so Dunning-Kruger was a study by two people named Dunning and Kruger. The paper they published was called Unskilled and Unaware of It. And basically they make the argument that the skill set necessary to be good at something is also the skill set necessary to be able to recognize whether you're good at something. And so so there's lots of people who think they're good at something when in reality they're not,
right?
Because they just don't know enough to know how bad they are at it. I've certainly seen that. I was part of a study at one point. I was one of the controllers for the study. I wasn't one of the test subjects. I was one of the controllers for a study where we had people play a game, and it was really about seeing how the communication patterns in between the various players playing the game worked, right? What communication methods gave them an advantage, which ones didn't. So we created a simple game and had them play it online, and so everybody's distributed, and they're playing with like phone conference calls, and then they had a distributed tool, a visualization tool and stuff. And one of the player cells we had was a group of high school students, and they were convinced that they were kicking butt. They were doing virtual high fives and, oh yeah, we're rocking and rolling, etc. And I and the other controller, they couldn't see us because we're just doing audio stuff. No cameras. We're just looking at each other because they are far and away the worst team we've ever seen. It's not even close. But they were convinced that they were just rocking and rolling the entire time.
Yep. Yeah. Self-awareness is important and sometimes difficult. There's a comment I wanted to respond to here. Why anyone would want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane astounds me. I can assure you that most airplanes, there are no perfect airplanes.
Yeah.
most of them have a quirk or two. Doesn't mean they're unsafe, and as someone who's jumped out of airplanes, actually, skydivers are afraid to land with the airplane because they don't trust the pilot. They feel safer jumping out of the airplane. I used to be a skydiver a long time ago.
Was it you that, I don't think it was you that told me the story about the guy who had like 100+ takeoffs in a C-130, and whoever was with him knew that he had like 100+ takeoffs in a C-130, and they're coming in to land, and he's really, really nervous. And it's like, I thought you've flown in C-130s all the time. And he goes, yeah, but I've never landed in one before.
Yep. No, that was, yeah, no, that was a long time ago, but yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. It was actually I was a poor college student. I couldn't afford pilot lessons at the time, so jumping out of them was cheaper. But
yeah, there's a comment. I suspect the Valiant was only made a Defiant class because that's what they had the sets for, probably.
Yeah.
There's lots of places in the history of Trek where it's like, why on earth did they choose that thing or that model or whatever?
Yeah, what they had on hand.
Yeah, it's like
still got to do it on a budget, right? So
yeah, it's like, which would you rather have, 2 Dideraxes or 3 Klingon birds of prey? Well, plus a galaxy. I might actually put my money on the 2 Dideraxes.
Well, depends on, yeah, but it depends. Were they cavorts or Borels? The cavort's the big version of the bird of prey. The Borel is the little version.
Oh, that's
sorry to muck it up for you.
No, I didn't think the big version was even that. Well, and I think actually, isn't it the case that in TNG, the reason why they have 2 versions is because the special effects guys just sort of said, we'll just use this model. And so the effects, the sizes were all over the place.
Right. Yeah. That was
all composite shots.
You can thank Star Trek 3 for that, essentially. So yeah, you could even argue that there's sort of 3 versions by the next generation of the bird of prey. There's the little 12-man version.
Yeah.
Then there's the Borel, which is about a crew of about 36. And then there's the Cavort, which is 350 meters. And, according to yesterday's Enterprise, 3 of them can take out a Galaxy class. So yeah, definitely dangerous, or, potentially dangerous. So if you've got a Galaxy and 3 Cavorts, you got the 2 Galaxy equivalent, basically. So yeah, I'd put my money on the 3 Klingons and the Galaxy over the two Borels, or I'm sorry, the 2 Dideraxes.
I can understand though why the Romulan commander would conclude that this is a fight not worth having.
Correct, because yeah, if everybody's starting the fight 100 meters off each other's bow,
But here's the thing to think about though, that actually, based upon how that balance of power works out there, that actually changes the meaning of his decision not to fight. And it's actually sort of means that his sort of attitude at the end is a little bit less bluster and a little bit more like, okay, you're right. I'm not going to be able, it's not going to be clubbing baby seals. And, there's no profit in it for either one of us to have this battle.
Yeah. Wait for another day.
That's more along the lines of you successfully kind of got things close to even, but that's about.
Yeah. Here's the deal. If you're in a fair fight, your tactics are not correct. Your setup for the battle is not correct. You don't want to fight fair fights. Those are dangerous.
That's what I always say to people who say things like, oh, we don't need the F-22 or we don't need the F-35. The F-15 is good enough. It's like, well, first of all, good enough is not always good enough. And second of all, we're fighting away games. I don't want this a fair fight. I want this to be like clubbing baby seals.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't want anybody to think that they stand a chance. Because that'll just prompt them to make a stupid decision. So there was something else I was going to say about this. I was going to say the 3 different birds of prey, I believe was originally a FASA RPG thing.
Well, so if you look in the old FASA game,
yeah, the Klingon source book.
Yeah, if you look in this, it's got the 3 different sizes.
Yeah.
It's got a small, medium, and a large, and that's before Kavort or Burrell. They came up with some designation for each of them. One's a 12-man ship, but if you watch Star Trek 3, in the opening scene, it was supposed to be this massive dreadnought, right? Because it dwarfs that dwarfs that freighter. And then a little later on, it's about a medium-sized ship.
And in Star Trek, and then like in Star Trek 4, they put it on a tennis court.
Well, basically, when it's beak to beak with the Enterprise, and the Burrell or the bird of prey is in the distance, it's still roughly the same size as the Enterprise. And then when they realized, no, we need to take it over with 5 people, they had to have the crew be small. It was just kind of clearly they were making the thing up, making things up as they went along, or they, whatever plan they started with, they changed. My general attitude is there's basically 3 sizes, and we saw it right in Generations.
Yeah.
The D11 or the D12, it was decommissioned, and it was just their small little Lursen Bator small pirate ship, basically 12 people or something like that.
Did we ever see anything in a canon source that backed up the claim from the FASA RPG that it was originally a Romulan design?
No, there's no canon source with that. I mean, that just goes back to, again, Star Trek 3, and originally it was going to be Romulans, and then they had a cool ship design, so they decided they wanted Klingons, and so they called it a Klingon bird of prey. So at some point, maybe they say there was a technology exchange, because the FASA game does have that design as a Romulan ship. But the point is that, but then in Enterprise, we see that they have a bird of prey also, the older bird of prey. So, it all got convoluted. It is what it is.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just how much you want to bend over backwards to explain it in universe. So
it goes back to the comment that I've made several times, which is that there isn't one canon. There's several canons. There's several different Star Treks, and none of them are fully internally consistent, and just pick the one you like and run with it.
Yeah, to a degree, yes, yeah. So now I think the general explanation is that no, Klingons have always had those birds of prey, and that's kind of their thing, and that's fine, But they just overused the bird of prey designation, for everything. So
yeah.
Let's see here. But yeah, and then Rick Sternbach has that owner's manual, which is, it's really well done. So I'd recommend it if anyone's interested in reading about the bird of prey. It's probably it's the Haynes Owner's Workshop Manual. So good book on that. And it talks a lot about the Klingons. And since it's written by Sternbach, you can call it probably pretty accurate.
Yes, it's well thought through, even if it is perhaps more accurate than the show is. Like, he made some comment on his Facebook page about when he was working on it, about how the people who designed the landing gear never had to actually make it fold into the ship.
Right.
And that was actually quite tricky, figuring out how it's going to fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not the first time that's happened.
Exactly. So, all right, let's go back to our show, or back to the
Valiant.
So, as time goes by, they're on board, and they realize. So it turns out that, and you really kind of gotta press the I believe button on this part, in my opinion. But the 7 or 8 officers, actual commissioned officers, all happen to get killed in their opening battle that they had with the Cardassian ship when the war started off. They were supposed to do a sort of a midshipman cruise, circumnavigating the Federation, and it was supposed to be a 3-month or 8-month tour or something like that. I can't remember how much. But then the war broke out, and then they got into a battle with the Cardassian ship, and apparently it was about a fairly even thing where they were both sort of crippled each other, and it was going to come down to whichever ship made their own repairs first and could finish the other one off. And so they were clearly badly damaged out there. And apparently as a result of all of this stuff, the ship was stuck at warp 3.2, which means it wasn't fast enough to truly make it back to Federation lines. And the Starfleet, not realizing that all the officers had been killed, sends a message to the Valiant, and they never responded, so that way they didn't give away their position. What? Yes.
So it's stuck at 3.2. How fast was the Jem'Hadar ship and the runabout going when the intercept?
Well, they typically drop out of warp, and I think the
that's true. That's true. Nog made a point of saying that they were more maneuverable in out of warp, so so they did that. Okay, I had forgotten.
Probably in the same way that a Zero is more maneuverable than an F-14.
What's the top speed on a runabout?
I thought it was warp 5 or something like that. So that's why I say we know that the Jem'Hadar fighters generally were faster than the Klingon birds of prey and stuff like that. So
I don't think any of the writers on that show understood that the difference between like warp 5 and warp 6 is not like the difference between 50 miles an hour and 60 miles an hour.
That's right. They were significantly different from each other.
So let me explain to you how exponents work.
Yeah. Yep. And let's see here. So So the Defiant or the Valiant comes out, knocks out the Jem'Hadar fighter, they get on board, and they're stuck at warp 3.2. There are no commissioned officers. And one of the cadets has essentially assumed command of the ship. And the Valiant had been assigned a mission. Starfleet assumed that the officers were still alive, had been assigned the mission of trying to find a Jem'Hadar battleship that was being constructed. The Jem'Hadar battleship, they specifically said, was twice the size of a galaxy and 3 times as powerful. So it was clearly nothing to be trifled with, which means a Defiant class ship, even that, would not stand a chance against against this battleship. And as we saw, it didn't.
Yeah.
Very clearly that it did not. And so the cadet captain has, and we have seen the cadet to captain program function at other times in Star Trek. So they come up with, so they're out looking for this battleship, and then they eventually find it, and they come up with a plan where they've launched a stealth probe, and it's done some scans, and it's identified something that they think is a weakness in the ship, where if they hit it with a certain type of radiation and stuff like that, and reconfigure the torpedoes, they'll be able to, it'll essentially, I think they said, turn those metal braces into the consistency of wet pasta, which means, they could destroy it. Problem was they had to reconfigure the torpedoes and lose some of the guidance system, and they'd have to get very close and manually aim them and all that kind of stuff. So they go on in, they plan. Now, Jake, couple things though. Jake points out to everybody, hey, my dad, he's kind of a big deal. And
knows a little bit about fighting battles.
Knows a little bit about this battle fighting thing. And he's like, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't touch this mission with a 10-foot pole. You're a frickin' cadet. What are you guys, what are you guys smoking? And unfortunately, but we also see that Nog kind of buys into the whole thing because Nog makes some suggestions, and suddenly the ship can go faster because he understands with his experience, how this ship works, and he knows what Chief O'Brien had done to the Defiant to make it work. But Nog had always wanted to be part of Red Squad and had always been, very enamored by these, and now he's part of them. And so he kind of gets wrapped up in all of this too. And so Nog thinks that they can do it. And so they're all kind of high on their own self-delusional, whatever, what would we call that? I don't know. They've been told that they were great a little too much, but without any real actual accomplishment to back it up. So anyways, they find the ship, they come up with a plan, they go and they make their attack, and they even think they've just about succeeded. They fly around, they do the maneuvering, they finally get in the big shot, and they get in behind it, and they make their attack. And then you see all the explosions, and you see them going away, and they're all cheering and high-fiving each other. And then, of course, you see the battleship emerge from the explosion, and it's, of course, a little angry.
Yes, annoyed.
It's annoyed. Let's say that's annoyed, and they and of course they start taking damage, and the ship just chases them down and destroys the ship, and somehow doesn't stick around apparently. So maybe they did some damage to it because it clearly didn't stick around to kill all the life pods and stuff.
Or take prisoners.
Right, exactly.
The thing that sort of baffled me about that is that they did something in that episode you very rarely see in Star Trek, which is the plan failed with no explanation as to what went wrong.
Right.
In fact, they even made a special point of saying, did you hit the target? And it's like, yeah.
I made it.
Like right on the money, did exactly what we needed to do.
Yep.
And it
just didn't work.
And with no explanation as to why. It's like, okay.
And the only thing is probably I would assume inexperience. The problem was way more complicated than they realized because they're not experienced or they were so inexperienced, just like your high schoolers there. They were too inexperienced to realize what they didn't know.
Were the shields up
on the battleship?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they were able to penetrate the shield. I don't recall.
Yeah, because wouldn't we think that shields would stop radiation? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that shields probably stop radiation.
Yeah, but maybe they poked a hole in the shield. Perhaps they poked a hole in the shield.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Perhaps their shields did stop the radiation.
Yeah.
So, and let's see here. I thought this was an interesting thing. It at least shows us, at least within Star Trek, that hey, all these fancy, super easy things that they do on the Enterprise and all of them, it's way more complicated. It takes a group, like you talk about how proficient everybody always seems to be in Star Trek, right? So it takes that level of proficiency to pull off all these sort of little miracles that they seem to. And that perhaps that kind of stuff is not what appears to be an everyday attribute on the Enterprise is still probably, this is still the, some of the best and the brightest in Starfleet on board that ship or something. So it lends some, it shows you that at least there is a spectrum of knowledge and experience and capability based on the crews and the leadership.
Part of what seemed to me about this was I had the thought at one point that the cadet captain's leadership skills seem to be reasonably good, although I would actually really like to hear your opinion of that, Commander Doyle, about whether you thought his leadership technique was good. His strategic and tactical decision-making was atrocious.
Well, I guess I would say that was the biggest part of his job, right? Because, the captains should be looking off at the horizon, making those strategic decisions or those longer term decisions. And ideally, you've got an XO and, your senior enlisted leader and stuff helping take care of a lot of the details and the day-to-day stuff. And perhaps that was going on, right? They had a cadet chief, they had a cadet XO, they had a cadet captain. But in the other one what was it? He was basically on drugs, right? He was popping little pills and stuff like that to keep.
Let's call it speed. It was, it seemed to have all the attributes of speed.
Yeah, right. So when you've gotten yourself, if you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of other people. Right? You can burn the candle at both ends for only so long, and you can push people a certain amount, and you can push yourself a certain amount sometimes. But you're not doing the people that you're entrusted to care for or to lead if you, ultimately just drive yourself into the ground, which is kind of what he was doing. So at that point, you're making bad decisions, and we see this, aviation, there's a reason we have the thing called crew rest, right?
Yep.
And I don't know, Chris, did you read about the collisions, that happened, out in Japan and,
Oh yeah.
I don't know if there are conclusions from that you could share.
I did some reading about that when it occurred. They had a new computer system that was difficult to use, non-intuitive, that they were not trained on, and the people that they pointed their finger at as being responsible for not training them on it was the same people that were saying, like, look, we need a stand down to train on this system. You can't just have us constantly being operational. We're not getting any training in.
Yeah. Because here's one of the things. When you're busy doing a lot of the day-to-day, everyday work, you're not training for the low probability events that possibly have big consequences, right? When I'm out flying my airplane around, ideally it's just a very routine flight. Take off, run through everything, land, nothing weird happens. But that's why when we get people in the simulator, we start throwing emergencies at them so that they can practice those things. You get a few days every year where you're in the simulator having stuff happen.
Kobayashi Maru.
Yes, some days there are. Yes.
I seem to recall you telling me that there was one particular scenario that the conclusion was this just simply isn't survivable.
Well, yeah, we can put different weather events like wind shear and stuff like that in there. And so, the simulator lets you kind of choose between, sort of light, moderate, severe, and some simulators, they're all a little bit different,
Yeah.
And some say non-survivable. So you can do everything right and still and when I watch these, when we have the event calls for putting in some sort of severe or unsurvivable wind shear event, it's basically like God just decided to put his cigarette out on the airplane. The plane just goes right into the ground. And, part of the point of that is that part of the point of that training, yes, we do V1 cuts also. But part of the point of that particular training is just to make sure everybody understands we're still just an airplane, and Mother Nature can be stronger than than your airplane. If you get into the wrong downdraft, wind shear is, eventually you can get kind of a wind shear where the wind is, pointed very strong going in a downward direction. So. You can get in a situation where the plane doesn't have enough thrust to counteract that. So it's like being in a strong river.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of the airborne equivalent of undertow.
It's the airborne equivalent. That's exactly. Yeah, that's probably a great way to put it.
So Scott made a comment about V1 cut. You should probably explain that to the non-aviators in the crowd.
Oh, sure. A V1 cut is basically what that means is V1 is the time at which is the speed when we're rolling down the runway. We're very cognizant of what speed we're at. And once you get to what we call V1, V for velocity, at V1 is essentially your go, no go decision, where you're either going to, maybe you've had an engine catch on fire or engine fail, and you're going to either, if it happens before V1, then you're going to abort the takeoff and hit the brakes and stop on the runway. But if it happens and you realize, hey, you've lost an engine and it's after V1, you're going to go ahead and take off with that engine, even though it just failed or caught on fire.
You're going to leave the runway in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, you are. Because if you try to stop the airplane past V1, you may not have enough runway left to stop the airplane before you slide off the end of the runway. And off of the end of the runway is usually not very smooth. And airliners are not, airplanes can be kind of fragile when they bounce into ditches and stuff like that.
You need to put on the off-road tires.
And you don't have time. So anyways, that's a V1 cut. So what we practice is the engine failing right at takeoff. And then they've got to run through all their procedures and fly the airplane and, run through the checklists and come back around and land. And actually, if you listen to the United flight that had that engine explode a little while later, and you listen to the air traffic control discussions from that, it is pretty much textbook what we run people through. When you listen to all the things that the pilots tell the air traffic controller, after they've handled the problem, once you hear all of that, all of those things, that's basically everything we train people to do and everything we're trained to do. So, and they did what sounds like a really fabulous job. So, though I'm sure it gets their attention a little bit more than it does in the sim.
Yes. That's the one thing about anything involving simulators or war games, etc., is that you can practice it in the sim a whole bunch of times, but your chances are you're going to walk out of the sim just fine.
There is a different sort of threat when you're in the simulator.
Yes.
Right? It's I get a job. That makes people plenty nervous. And for a lot of pilots, I would suggest that it makes them more nervous than the whole being worried about dying, because generally, if you're confident enough to be a pilot, you're not that worried that you're about to crash the airplane. So,
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that.
So, but being in the simulator tends to be pretty busy, and it's what we call a Jeopardy event. Like, this could involve a little piece of paper being sent to the FAA if you really hose this up. So, and that's career type stuff, making a living, living indoors, eating hot food, puts all that stuff into jeopardy. So, yeah, most people take it pretty seriously.
The entire idea of like V1 cut reminds me of one of the things that I see missing in a bunch of science fiction on a frequent basis is professionals develop their own vocabulary to describe the usual things that happen and the things they have to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And Pat's heard me talk about this a bunch. I've mentioned it here before, but I'm going to mention it again. One of the things that drives me nuts is like there's a particular episode of Babylon 5 where Sheridan is planning an attack, and they're gonna go attack this system. An Alliance force is going to go in there, and they come out of hyperspace, and he starts barking orders that are trivial, and he should have looked at the display and said, execute plan Alpha 4 based upon whatever he saw. Instead, he says, little ships cover big ships do this, it's like, no, that's not how that should work. Because, in this case, it should have been a set of standard operating procedures, a standard TT&P, tactics, techniques, and procedures. There would have been a nifty opportunity there, I think, to have a discussion about how this is a multi-species force and they don't have a common doctrine and we're having to cobble together a common doctrine and hopefully everybody will stick with the plan and maybe these guys don't stick with the plan and Sheridan has to yell at them. And that
would be, and that there could be a lot of room for drama in there.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of room for drama. Like
right. I think about how hard it is to get a group of people to figure out what restaurant and what to go to and what movie to go see.
I have been in the Combat Information Center of a destroyer that was functioning as the lead ship for a multinational force. Mm-hmm. It was us and the Japanese. We were the bilateral force, and this was in RIMPAC.
Yeah, I was at a RIMPAC. We had Japanese ships on the radio once too and stuff. So
yeah, this was the RIMPAC right after 9/11. So it was a weird RIMPAC. We didn't have an aircraft carrier. We sort of threw a RIMPAC together with like 3 months notice. The U.S. Navy kept going, oh, we don't know if we're going to do it. Maybe we are. Maybe we are. Maybe we are. Maybe we aren't. And all of our Pacific allies just said, just make a damn decision already. Just do it. We don't care how big it is. Just do it. And so, all right, we'll do one. Yeah. So they picked Desron 1, which is the destroyer, which is a training Desron. They're mostly reservist type stuff. It is not a unit that normally deploys, but they were available because they weren't deployed. And they said, we're going to send you to sea. Mm-hmm. And the Commodore was just fantastic. He picked his senior NCOs and his junior officers because this was a training evolution for his JOs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, we were with the bilateral force, which was U.S. and Japanese, and then you had a multilateral force, which was U.S. and everybody else except the Japanese, because there's some interesting restrictions, Japanese internal restrictions on, they can't do multinational events. They weren't doing a multinational event. They were doing a bilateral event. It just happened that there was a multinational event taking place about 3 miles over there.
Right.
Okay. Right. That's where, if that works for you, that's great. And so I got to watch, them dealing with the Japanese, who were really proficient, but they definitely had a different style. Mm-hmm. And like at one thing, like when we're doing anti-submarine warfare stuff, keep in mind, all my doctrine is like 15 years out of date at this point. When we're doing anti-submarine warfare, anti-submarine warfare can take days. So when we go to anti-submarine warfare stations, it's not like going to red alert. It's not all hands on deck. It's not battle stations. It's heightened awareness and there's special things going on, et cetera, but it's like battle stations light.
Yeah, you've got to be able to sustain it.
You got to be able to sustain it. Well, the Japanese don't do that. They go to battle stations. Mm-hmm. And at one point, the Commodore comes in and he goes, are the Japanese still at battle stations? And it's like, well, I think so. It's like, are they still at ASW quarters? And it's like, yeah, I think so. It's like, yeah, they go to battle stations for that. They've been like all hands on deck for like 12 hours now. You need to let them go.
Nice.
And even the senior enlisted guys didn't understand that. Mm-hmm. They just didn't know. And so it's like, oh, we've noticed that they've kind of gotten a little bit slower to respond to stuff. They're just exhausted.
Yeah, I bet. All right. Well, hey, we are pretty much at our time for the evening. So, any closing comments or remarks?
I've got one.
Go for it.
Remember, set your clock ahead an hour.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Spring forward time.
And remember, for anyone, make sure to share this channel with people and and subscribe and do all that stuff that YouTube has you doing. So, that helps keep the thing going and this way we can continue with the stuff. So, and it certainly helps out the Axanar project and everything too. So,
And as Wright says, wear your damn mask.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Can't even do it. Oh, buddy, what are you doing?